Welcome to part 3 of the DMX for Unreal Engine Virtual Production mini course. This is building on part 2, where we went over the very basics of .2, how to get the show file loaded in, and a very brief interface walkthrough. Now let's load up Unreal 425. Presently it is on beta 7, so let's load up a AV template, film, television, and live events. Just a blank one. Without starter content or ray tracing. And we will call it DMX sample. And then create project. Here we are. Project file is out of date. Would you like to update it? Go ahead and update. That is likely just because Unreal has had some patches since the template files were updated. So go ahead and allow that. Then create a new folder called maps to stay organized. Control and click different assets to multi-select, and then drag and drop to move them into the folder. So hopefully that recorded okay. Before we get too far, I'm going to disable real-time on the editor for me, as well as go in here, pull up a FPS overlay with stat FPS, and here in this case, again, so it doesn't kill the recording, do r.vsync editor 1. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing this to enforce a 30 FPS vsync cap with my monitor set to 30 FPS to reduce recording load. So that should be all set. Hopefully this recording should be okay now. So next we want to go to Edit, Plugins, which brings us to the Plugins tab, which I had already open. Then go to Media, DMX Engine, tick the box, message pops up, hey, this is a beta, don't worry about it, click yes. DMX Fixtures enabled, same message, click yes, and restart the editor. And here we are again. Right, we move to the default map. So it is not currently set to default, so let's fix that by going to Maps and Modes, Editor Startup Map, and choosing, I believe it's main is the one we were on. Then if we go to recent projects and reload DMX sample, it's going to prompt us if we want to. Yes, I could just open the map, but this is also a way of validating that change we just made worked. Really, the longest part of this is really getting the project initially set up. So now we have a project with the DMX plugins enabled. Real-time is still off. I believe I need to re-enable the editor vsync though, so let me just double check that. Yep, I need to turn it on every time I open the editor because I have not put it in a engine config file yet. r.vsync editor 1 caps out to 30 FPS. Perfect. Okay. So now that we have done that, and again, the recording should be good, we want to do a few more things. I always like to add the content folder and the DMX Fixture content folder to favorites by right-clicking. I can jump between them fairly quickly. Also be sure to click View Options in the lower right and enable Show Plugin Content. Next, get some better contrast when we actually have our lights in here. I like to grab Atmospheric Fog, Sky Sphere, and Skylight. You can either delete them, or you can simply check Actor Hidden in Game, and they will not be rendered. Likewise, there were the default touch joysticks on by default in this template, so we can go to Edit, I believe, Project Settings, Engine, and then Input, and then Mobile. Always show touch interface. Uncheck that. Then now is a good time to save all. And it's asking about the project being out of date again. I'm going to click update. That might have something to do with having just added plugins. So, because those are referred to in the uproject file, which is just a text file if you didn't know. All right, so we have that nicely configured. Got a nice clean background without a bunch of bright stuff behind where our lights are going to be, and the touch joysticks are off. So next, yeah, there's a small checklist of things that you need to do to your project when you first start up, but next we want to go to DMX Fixtures content. You will only have to do this once per engine version, basically, if at all. There's a small bug under DMX Fixtures content color wheel T_color_lavender with texture asset. By default, has some incorrect settings relative to the other sibling textures it has. By default, it is set to normal map at the time of recording. So you want to set it to default. The reason mine is fixed is because I fixed it already. You'll want to check sRGB, which I might have missed before, and then texture group. Instead of world normal map, which yours is likely to be, you should set it to world. And then save the asset. This is important because when you actually get the movers, the sample moving head fixture actually talking art at the lavender option on the color wheel, which will also show up as lavender in the lighting software, that will show up as yellow because the texture is being interpreted as a normal map. So make sure to fix that. Hopefully the plugin developers get that fixed for future releases. We will see. That is most of the setup. I think there's just a couple more things. Yep, just two more things, both of which are in project settings. Actually, no, one more thing in editor preferences. This is something that, with the AV coding, I've noticed that I tend to do it a lot more, where I have a bunch of windows open relating to the editor, so there is a option for use less CPU in the background. I like to uncheck that, because otherwise when I click over to another window, Unreal will throttle down to like 3 FPS, which in some cases is helpful, but when we're dealing with other software talking to Unreal, we don't want it throttling down just because we change context. So, looks like I already had that set, but make sure that is unticked if just for the best experience there. You don't have to, but that's what I would recommend. So, jumping back, then we also have, to wrap up, two more things in project settings. So go to Edit, Project Settings. The first one is, again, under Maps and Modes, Game Instance Class should be BP_DMX_Game Instance. And then scroll all the way down to plugins, DMX plugin, right click to expand all. And then we want to look at communication settings in this interface IP address field. Change that to the IP address of your computer that you set up earlier. That should be in either the 10.something range or the 2.something range. If you don't know what your IP address is, I mean, you should have set it unless you've done, unless you've converted your home network over to issue addresses in that range automatically, which is a somewhat more advanced configuration in terms of actually setting that up. You should have set it manually, as I showed in the .2 portion of this. But if you set it and you forgot, you can very easily, in Windows, open Task Manager, which if you hit the Windows key and start typing Task Manager, it will pop up for you. So you can have Task Manager here, and by default, it might be this small list if you don't use Task Manager that much. So click More Details, and then it will give you this view, which I find to be much more helpful. And then you can go to Performance, and then there will be listings for all of your network interfaces. So click your Ethernet one, and it will tell you that here your IP address is 10.0.0.5 or whatever it is in your case. So it may work if you leave it as 0, but if it's something other than 0, like say if you set the IP address as it's going to be a certain thing and then you change your mind later and have it be something else, if that old setting is in there that's not all zeros, definitely won't work. I'm not sure, I haven't tried it with just zeros, but for good measure, just put your IP address in there so that way it's listening on the right network card, especially if you have multiple network cards. DMX isn't too heavy on the network compared to some things, but in general, if you've got Ethernet, you should use it. It's much more reliable and stable from a latency standpoint. So that covers that. So File, Save All. So next, yeah, this is really kind of the meat of it. Next, we need to create a DMX library asset. So we go to our content browser. Just our normal game content is fine. If you want to put it in a folder, you can. We don't have too much else going on here, so I'm not going to worry about it. But right click, go to the DMX category, and click DMX Library to create a new DMX asset. And I'm going to call it Sample DMX Library using camel caps. Okay, so there are 5 tabs here: controllers, fixture types, fixture patch, monitor, and output console. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm only going to cover building the default moving head, which can be found in the DMX Fixtures content folder as BP_moving head. We're actually going to want to go ahead and open that up right now, actually, because we are going to be referencing it in just a moment. There's a DMX name mapping under the variables section in this BP moving head, and each of these have name properties, which we're going to want to reference in a moment. Likewise, if you haven't already, or you don't have it open from the last portion of the tutorial, you're going to want to go ahead and open ma.2. I've already done so here in another screen region. So I also have it open on the laptop, which is actually going to be outputting the ArtNet, but I also have it here on the desktop in session for convenience. I believe I went over sessions in the last section as far as how to connect those. I can control the session from here, or without moving my mouse, also via the laptop touchscreen, and it updates in both places. Going back over to Unreal, we're going to want to click the Controllers tab and then New Controller, Sample, ArtNet, Controller. I am also using camel caps. Most of these default settings are fine, however we want to change the amount of universes to 2. It makes it easier to test, especially if you're not sure whether your lighting software uses universe ID 0 or 1 for the first universe. That makes it easy to try both. And I believe the universe starts at 1, so that's fine. And then remote universe range start, that's the thing that you have to mess with as either 0 or 1. In this case, for .2, it's 0. And you can see the range end auto-populates. So based on how many universes we have. And then we want to make sure this says ArtNet. And then with that, I believe if we go to the monitor tab, we can start to see traffic. So if I go over to .2, I pull up this fader, and then click the button below to start an animation, we can come back over to Unreal and see that the values are animating. So that's the raw plugin setup, but now as far as actually being able to do anything with it, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So back in .2, I'm just going to click this button that I set up to just turn off the lights, and I'll pull the fader down for good measure. So then, back in Unreal, can go to Fixture Types, click the Add New Fixture Type button, and I'm going to call this Claypacky Sharpie, and hit Enter. Then, back in .2, you don't necessarily have to do this, but we're going to be referencing it for the next step. We go to Setup, Patch and Fixture Schedule, which is where you add fixtures in .2. Add a new fixture. We're not actually going to add anything, but we go to Select Other to get to the Fixture Library. So then I search for Sharpie. So Claypacky, Sharpie, standard lamp on, 16 channel. What we're looking at here is specifically the fixture profile and what all of the parameters are. So we reference this, and then we reference the names of the different parameters in this section here, and we populate a fixture type with those parameters. So in this case, we add a mode because, as you can see in .2, there can be multiple modes with different amounts of channels, depending on how many parameters you're wanting to use to set up things most efficiently for any given show. So now that we have our reference in .2, we go back to Unreal, where we have our Sharpie. We click the Modes, Add button, right-click to expand, and call it Standard Mode, and hit Enter. Then there's 16 channels and 14 functions, because a couple of functions use 2 channels each. So we click the Array Elements button for functions 14 times until it says 14 array elements. And if you add an extra one, you can come down here to the down arrow here and delete one. Then we can right-click on Functions, Expand All. And this is the relatively tedious part, but not too bad. First we have color 1. So yeah, basically we're going to go through, and if one of these has a equivalent in the moving head blueprint, we reference the name of that function, which in this, for example, the dimmer is just dimmer. We put that in the function name field as appropriate. So we're not going to do all of the sample fixtures in this tutorial. We'll just do the moving head, but the sample library has all 4 default fixtures implemented using this exact technique. I can say the other sample fixtures are approximately, well, the moving head is approximately a clay packy Sharpie standard mode with 16 channels. The static fixture is approximately a Chauvet Slim Par 56 with 7 channels. The BP strobe fixture is approximately a Martin Atomic 3000 in 1 channel mode, and a BP moving mirror is approximately an Elation Vision Scan 577 16-bit mode in 16 channel mode. So those are all implemented in the sample project on GitHub, but they use the exact same techniques here. You pull up that mode in your lighting software, and then it will tell you what things to implement. And if you have functions on the fixture that are not present in the Unreal equivalent, I'm just putting the names in from the lighting software and then appending null underscore to the front of them. So not everything is quite in there, but it supports pretty much all of the default features for these fixtures for the samples. So I'm going to be quiet and just kind of start punching through these and then just basically follow along. So here, there isn't a focus parameter, but there's a zoom parameter, so I'm just mapping those together. And then here on parameter 10, you can see 10 is pan, 11 is pan fine. So this is one of those ones, followed by the next one, tilt, where it uses two channels for essentially one function. So in Unreal, for the pan is channel 10. So on channel assignment 10, we say this parameter is just called pan, and then we change the data type to 16-bit, and it will use two channels. And then it's the same for tilt. So here on channel 12 we have tilt, which is 16-bit. So the 9th array element is channel 10, the 10th array element is channel 12, so it properly skips channel 11 because channel 11 is part of the pan function. So then channel 14, 15, and 16 do not exist, so functionally we are done. However, for the sake of completeness, I am going to fill out the last three function names as nulls, essentially. Okay, so ran out of recording space, so just restarting the recording. Shouldn't have lost any recording information. So should be good to go, so just continuing on. Null underscore global fixture reset. Null underscore lamp control. And that part is done. So click save, go to Fixture Patch, and then we add a fixture of the type Claypacky Sharpie. And so it defaults to Claypacky Sharpie underscore patch. So I just replace the patch with a number, in this case 1 since it's the first one, hit enter, and then right click to duplicate, and it will create a second one and auto increment the name. And you can see this is using, the first one is using channels 1 to 16, and the second is using channels 17 to 32, as expected. Now that we've got those patched, we can go to the editor, right click, and use WASD to move around, and then E moves up and Q moves down. And then while holding right click, the scroll wheel backwards slows down the camera, and moving it up speeds up the camera. So now that we have nearly everything done, we want to set our snap mode for demonstration purposes. We want to set the grid snap to 1 meter, and then grab a moving head from BP moving head, drag it out, drag it up, and then hit the end key, and that will snap it to the ground. And I'm actually going to also the W key, E key, and R key move between the translate, rotation, and scale tools respectively. So I'm going to hit E and rotate this 90 degrees to see it easier. And then I'm going to hit the W key, hold down Alt, and then drag off a second one, which you can do with any actor that you have selected. Now, here's the interesting part that makes everything come together. After we've done everything else, we go to our game content folder. We grab our sample DMX library. We grab the first fixture, expand this section here by just mousing over the line, come down to the DMX component, expand Fixture Patch, click this arrow to select our asset, or we can select it from a dropdown. Then we go to Fixture Patch, select this dropdown, and then we select the first one. This is our first fixture with address 1. This is equivalent to setting the LCD on a physical fixture with the address. Then we grab the second one, and we do the same. then we set it to number 2. Now would be a great time to save. Just a moment. And while it saves, we can go over to .2 and back out of the fixture patch without changing anything. And then save is nearly done. Once the save is done, we can run the game. All right. So just click the play button. And here we are. I have my Unreal Editor configured for a specific resolution and aspect ratio for some other work, but it gives us a nice cinematic perspective of these two lights here. So if I press Shift F1 to regain my mouse cursor, I'll grab this fader here in .2, and then I'll bring it up, and we have ArtNet coming in. So then if I click this button here, I can cycle forward through cues, and if I grab this button here, I can cycle backwards. Or I can hit this button up top to turn the fixtures off. So now that we've done that, I'm just going to turn the lights off and stop the game, and then very quickly I'm going to move this one light over to the other and drag these over, and I'm going to drag off 4 more clones of these guys. The same way I cloned off the second one. And then I'm going to grab all 6 of these, set my grid snap to 0.5 meter, and just to get those nice and centered. Now grab our sample DMX library asset again. Actually, no, we don't need to because we cloned them, but we do need to go to the DMX component of each one and change the patch. Well, of course, we only patch 2 fixtures, so we go back to sample DMX library and duplicate 4 more of them. So you can right-click and duplicate, or you can use the shortcut key Control-W, and it will, again, auto-increment the numbers. So then we come back to here, grab our second one, or rather our third, go to the DMX component and set it to number 3, set our fourth one to number 4, and so on. Okay, so yeah, file, save all. And then we are basically done. So here is 6 of those guys, which actually fits my particular viewport aspect ratio very nicely. So I can come back here, and actually I can just kind of drag the window over to get these in the same view. And then I bring up this fader, all of the lights come on. Then I can click this button to cycle forward through our cues. And so you can click on the cue section to expand it. You can see the full cue stack. And then I can click forward through them or backwards through them. And they are all working fully properly. You can also disable that cue stack and pull the fader down, and they'll of course turn off, or I can just grab the Sharpies group, then say full to bring them on, and then I can Windows please. I can come over here and change the color. I want to do so here I can make them lavender, and they will indeed be lavender instead of yellow. But I can set them to a gradual rotate on the color wheel. And they'll very gradually transition through all of the colors. Or you can click the arrows in the other direction and they'll go very fast. Arguably too fast. Yeah, basically, if you want to mess with things that haven't been programmed, you just click a group to select it, or click it again to unselect it. And then you can control the parameters through this sidebar here, as far as the dimmer, which just turns it on and off, position, namely with the Sharpies, and also the scanners or the moving mirror, controls the pan tilt of it. You can control gobos. I don't remember if the gobos line up with the sample fixture. They do not line up on the vision scan. I don't quite have a perfect lock on all of these as far as what they actually are, but I'm reasonably close with all of these. And then there's, of course, color, where you can control the raw color wheel parameter. There's the swatch book, which finds the closest color. Or you can just navigate the color picker and it will basically snap to whatever they are. Or if you have a fixture that supports RGB color, as far as like 3-component color instead of a color wheel, like the PARs, then you can basically choose any 8-bit RGB color that way. So yeah, that's pretty much the bulk of it. So they've moved to a nice orange in the background there. And then, yeah, so you can basically bring these back on. And because I haven't stored color information in the patterns, I believe patterns combine with color. And if I want to go back to color and throw these into rainbow vomit mode, that's these particular fixtures rainbow vomit mode with a color wheel simulation. I wouldn't call that super pretty, but I don't know. Sometimes there's a use for it, I guess. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. I'm gonna bring these back to the slow color rotate. That pretty much wraps up the part 3 of the DMX for Unreal Engine Virtual Production mini course. We will next move on to part 4, where we actually work with the DMX output through custom code, and we will be basically building on top of this exact same project, so you'll definitely want to keep this project handy, or you can reference the sample project as uploaded on GitHub. But yeah, moving on.